What's up, Penn State fans? It's BWI Live, December 10th, 2025. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I am Greg Pickle from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We are off and running with the latest edition of BWI Live, and it starts with some new coaching staff news. Stan Drayton, the first year, and apparently going to be only year, Penn State running backs coach, is being targeted to take the same role at South Carolina, according to On3's Pete Nakos, rather. Our sister site, Gamecock Central, down in the South Carolina media market, has been hinting for a couple days that this might get across the finish line. It now looks like it will. Much like Penn State, well, not much like Penn State, but sort of like Penn State, their board of trustees is actually involved in more than just the head coach contract voting process. They are also involved in the assistant coach voting, contract voting process. So they have to schedule a meeting 24 hours in advance to approve anything. A meeting is scheduled for tomorrow related to athletic contract, coach contracts. So it looks like Stan Drayton will be on his way out of Penn State at the end of the 2025 season. Not the only one to do that, of course. I'm going to ramble a sec while T. Frank finishes up some production stuff, but good morning to you, sir.
Hi. Can I
yes.
I want to jump in here.
Yep.
So kind of like Jim Knowles, the situation did not bear out what I think is a quality coach in Stan Drayton. And Penn State fans are going to take what happened last year as the gospel on Stan Drayton that he's a bad coach. And I don't believe that to be true. I even think that as he worked through it, you saw a better version of Nick Singleton at the end of the season than you saw in 2024. But the output, and this is, again, where I always try to focus on process. Like, I'm watching the Iowa State players. I don't look at the score. I don't look at their stats. I want to see how they're playing in context of the play and then their execution without having some of the context of the end result. I'll get there in the end, right, with how they play, whether they win or lose. And it's kind of the same thing with these coaches. Stan Drayton's a good running back coach. Like, I do think that this is a potential loss for Penn State, but I understand if Penn State fans don't care and don't believe me because they didn't see any of the proof last year. Because this assumption is Katron Allen was that good to begin with, and I think he improved last year, but you're just going to credit because how poorly Nick Singleton played for half the season. You're going to credit that is the only thing that happened. But I do think Stan Drayton's a good coach, and I do think that if there was an opportunity for him to be retained, or if this whole thing hadn't happened, you might have seen something different from him at Penn State in an alternate universe. So I don't think he's a bad coach, and I don't think that necessarily what happened at Penn State was indicative of his abilities overall. So, that's just a thing I wanted to say. I don't know that it matters in the ether of what's going to happen because, there's a reason he went from this job immediately to another Power 5 SEC running back coaching job.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And obviously Matt Campbell's working on building out his staff, whether or not he decided to just simply move on to somebody else, not named Stan Drayton to be his running backs coach, or whether Stan Drayton wanted to go to South Carolina remains to be seen. Either way, it looks like he will be out the door, not the only member of James Franklin's last coaching staff to do so, but is the first one that we're talking about in terms of leaving Penn State to go to a job at a school that is not Virginia Tech. So late last night, Danny O'Brien, the quarterback's coach, is reportedly leaving Penn State to be the Virginia Tech quarterback's coach. No surprise there. ESPN's Pete Thamel first reporting that news earlier in the day. On3's Pete Nakos reported that Ty Howell would be leaving Penn State to handle offensive coordinator duties for James Franklin's Virginia Tech staff. So I'm sure a few more of those will pop up in the days and weeks ahead as these schools work to finalize their 2026 coaching staffs. But T. Frank, excited for Ty Howell to see what he can do as an offensive coordinator. He certainly had a couple chances to call plays at Penn State, and it'll be interesting to follow how Lyons Letterman does in that role in the ACC.
And I think that that's one of those wish him well sort of situations if you're a Penn State fan where you understand leaving your alma mater to follow James Franklin for a step up. We've talked about this of not lateral moves and all those things for a while now. So just the idea that he's going to be the play caller there, I think is a very important thing for the conversation and the narrative around his decision to leave. And I would say, because as you pointed out, well-earned, a guy who has been, in situations where he's called plays, he's been a very good offensive staffer for Penn State, great recruiter. And so just generally, an earned opportunity for him at Virginia Tech, and we'll see how that goes. It's funny because You start to see some of the Virginia Tech beat writers and professional fans on social media who, follow the program and set the temperature of things. Like, very excited about James Franklin, very excited about the recruiting budget, very excited about the recruiting class.
Yeah.
Last couple of things, maybe not as excited about some of these coaching hires and decisions, that they didn't go out and get a big name coordinator, and that they're bringing over some of these staffers from Penn State on an offense, again, that over the last couple of years was not necessarily firing on all cylinders. Now, again, the context of all those things is going to get lost in social media, but it is, we'll see how long the honeymoon phase lasts for any fan base, even one excited for James Franklin and the future like they are at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So those are the latest staffing moves that we're aware of as we record this at a little after 10 a.m. on December 10th. If more come up during the show, we will share them with you. Obviously, we've discussed previously the number of off-field staff members that followed James Franklin to Virginia Tech. We're starting to see the reverse of that now with off-field staff members from Iowa State come with Matt Campbell to Penn State. And that will continue to take shape over the days and weeks ahead. He has to fill out what's the right word for this? He will have to hire more people than he's ever hired before. Like
and all at once, right?
And all at once, right? Yeah. Like if you look at Iowa State's athletic directory, I think they had. Well, I can tell you because I have it in front of me here. They had like a handful of analysts. And a handful might be even too many. Like it was definitely no more than 5. And Penn State last year, I think, had 14. So some of those guys will stay. Some of those guys are attached to coordinators. So if both coordinators would leave Penn State, those guys would be going out the door too. Long story short, from the recruiting side of things, we'll see how it plays out. And hopefully by tomorrow, the guys will have more info to share with you about that. But General Manager Derek Hoodger is now here from Iowa State, joining Matt Campbell, who had Penn State in the general manager role. His chief of staff, Greg Bannock, I hope I pronounced that right, Greg, is the chief of staff from Iowa State. So that's the role Kevin Threlko used to have. Aaron Hillman, sports performance manager, is his title at Penn State. He oversaw strength conditioning and nutrition efforts at Iowa State. The head strength and conditioning coach for Matt Campbell with the Cyclones, Reed Kagi, is here now as well. Trent Sladenow, director of player personnel for football, is here. And obviously we know Terry Smith will be a part of his staff, Matt Campbell's first staff at Penn State. So that's the latest staffing news as we know it, T. Frank. A lot to learn here moving forward without question. Yeah. And we'll see how it plays out.
The strength coach to me is the one I'm most interested in. I among the 1,000 things I need to learn and a bunch of trying to download all the information about the Iowa State football program into my brain as quickly as possible. The strength staff is critical. I'm just going to underline this again for fans that don't necessarily understand. It's different than it was before, where you do have. It used to be the strength staff was the only staff that could interact with the players in the offseason. And that's changed in college football. But in terms of the volume of interaction, like there's nobody who interacts with them on a more regular basis and is a literal building block to the athletic performance on the field than the strength staff. Right. So don't underestimate that. And that's what I'm interested in learning more about is their head strength coach and like his philosophies and all those things. Because, again, Chuck Losey was the man. He was really, really good. And Penn State's lack of injuries, their testing numbers at the combine, building athletic freaks, these things are directly tied to sports performance. And, with the nutrition staff and the things that they had built here at Penn State, a lot of that infrastructure is going to remain, but the people, that's the biggest determining factor, is if you have people in those positions to take those resources and maximize them. I just don't know enough about the Iowa State strength staff to say, like, this is a home run hire. This is going to be on the same level as Chuck Losey. I have no clue. So that's going to be one of those things where once we get through the players going in and out and the coaches going in and out, it's something we're going to have to learn more about.
No doubt about it. Yeah, someone's asking in the chat about Chuck Losey. So the expectation at this point, of course, is that he will follow James Franklin to Virginia Tech. If you follow our work over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, I can't imagine that surprises you. There was a quote from Losey, I think it was over the summer, where he basically said, I'm a James Franklin guy. James Franklin is my guy, and vice versa. Like they're as attached to the hip as you could be in the college football coaching profession. And head coaches, when they leave for other jobs, almost always, not always, but almost always take their strength and conditioning coach with them. And the times
Like
they
we
don't,
see here.
it's usually right. And so in the times they don't, there's usually a good reason for it. James Franklin does not have a good reason to not take Chuck Losey with him. So the expectation at this point, of course, is that he will be moving on at the end of the 2025 season. So I guess that's a segue to just real quick note something from yesterday's Pinstripe Bowl news conference, which we're going to talk about, and the game, because that's right, there's a game still to be played a little bit later in the show.
No, there's not.
Yeah.
There's
But
not
Terry
a.
Smith
I reject the idea there's a bowl game in the middle of all of this.
Right. Yeah. So Terry's, I wish we could do that to you, Frank, but we cannot. So we will cover all angles for you all here on BWI Live. But Terry Smith said yesterday when asked about Ty Howe coaching in the bowl game, because Ty Howe, before that news conference started, was linked to James Franklin's offensive coordinator job at Virginia Tech. And Terry Smith said that the expectation was that he would, but they were still having discussions, still working on that. So time will tell. But I think at this point, most of these guys would like to stay through the bowl game if possible. It's not always possible, but I think at this point, that would make the most sense for everyone and certainly give Terry Smith the fewest amount of headaches possible to deal with during bowl game prep. A lot of questions in the chat about staff stuff. It's $1 to join BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We've been talking about the staff literally since Matt Campbell was hired, and so some of the moves we're waiting to see. I think it's really important maybe to stop here, for a second, T. Frank, and this will be a nice segue to tell everyone about game time. But these things take time. Like, I think there's this expectation out there that Matt Campbell is going to have his staff set within, say he hasn't even been in State College yet for 72 hours. And I think there's this expectation that he's going to have his staff set and all of his decisions made by the end of the day, Tuesday, or the end of the day today. It comes together quickly. It doesn't always come together that quickly. There's a lot of conversations that need to be had, and there's a lot of moving parts. Penn State and Matt Campbell or T. Frank are not the only ones making hires right now. So I think everyone, as much as everyone loves to up to the minute, need to know, got to know, want to know, and I get it, and we appreciate that because it's a part of our business. These things take time, and it's not always as snap of a finger as you might want it to be.
Yeah, and these are a lot of these things that we're going to say are going to sound a lot like James Franklin. Matt Campbell has made it very clear he's a relationship-forward coach. He is a guy that wants to get to know people. He wants to build trust. And if he doesn't trust somebody because he doesn't know them, it's going to be hard for him to just say, yep, I'm retaining Deion Barnes. Or, yep, Dan Connor, you're my linebackers coach. These are big responsibilities to coach the players that you're saying, hey, trust me. And if you don't know those people, you've got to get to know them. This is speed dating. And you got to make those decisions quickly, as Greg just said. But you don't just look at a CV. You don't just look at a reputation or take somebody's word for it. There's some of this that you do have to take some time to do it the right way. And that's what he said when he met with the media, is basically he doesn't want to sacrifice in the short term by making decisions quickly. He'd rather make the right decisions. And so if you're excited about Matt Campbell because he's a good coach and you're excited about the next stage of Penn State football, this is one of those situations where you have to trust the process and the person in charge of the process, because otherwise none of this makes any sense. It's just chaos. You're just throwing darts into the wind. So that's where we are. And again, we have a lot of really smart people, not me, but a lot of really smart people over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com who are working to get you the information as soon as it is available, but it may just not be available. That's how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, T. Frank. I think we'll have a lot better idea by the end of this week and certainly the start of next week. That feels like a safe bet to me that by the time we do this show next Wednesday, I feel like we're going to have a pretty good idea of what Matt Campbell's first staff is going to look like. Maybe not all the puzzle pieces, maybe not all of the decisions being made. Clearly he's going to have, again, when you talk about hiring, bigger staff than he's ever dealt with, there's people down the board in the recruiting realm he's going to have to hire, whether it's guys or girls who stay, whether it's guys or girls who he was with at Iowa State, or whether it's ones he finds elsewhere. There are more roles at Penn State. That's part of the opportunities that he has here in terms of the resources and access to things that he may not have had at Iowa State. So a lot to figure out, a lot of moving pieces. And all the while, again, people are interviewing. It's not like they're just talking to Penn State. If they're talking to Matt Campbell, they're probably talking to somebody else. So
Yep.
these things take time, and everyone wants to get them resolved as quickly as possible as we sit now less than a month away from the portal opening. But they usually take a little bit longer than fans want. So
Yeah.
anyway, if you don't want to take a long time to go to the checkout process and figure out that you're going to owe a lot more money than you think you're going to owe for tickets to your favorite sporting events, use GameTime.co. So GameTime has tickets listed right now for all your favorite NFL, NBA, college basketball, and even college hockey events. Penn State will be back at Beaver Stadium on July 31st, not the football team, of course, the hockey team, or January 31st, rather, when they take on Indiana. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. Michigan State. And you can sit behind the bench. You can sit behind right at center ice, and you can do all that with the prices included, fees included in your prices. I am butchering this, T-Frank. We're going to get through it, though. You heard that right. You won't be surprised at checkout. You can use promo code ON3 at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. My favorite parts of the Game Time app are seeing views from my seat and the all-in pricing feature. So take the guesswork out of buying college anything. Tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code ON3 for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code ON3, ON and the number 3 for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. T-Frank, one more bit of news to get to, buddy. Vanga Awani is a newly minted On3 All-American for the 2025 season.
Oh, yeah, well-deserved. Penn State's most consistent offensive lineman this year. Played his best down the stretch, I think, and was one of the stable forces even during the struggle in the first part of the year when Penn State had some issues with communication and execution. He was not part of that. And I don't know, I struggle with this. I love the draft, and I love scouting and evaluating talent. Here's what I know. Venga's going to be a starter in the NFL. How he tests in the NFL draft, I think, will determine a big portion of where he goes in the draft, and we don't know that necessarily. I don't know that he has ever turned into the absolute over-the-top mauler that you would say is a first-round draft pick, and I think he's a great athlete. He reshaped his body this year, and I think that was a key to unlocking what we saw from him. I don't know he's a first-round draft pick. There's certain things you look at when you're just trying to decide these things, and it takes one team to want him as just because he's a great football player and he's going to be a starter and he's super reliable and there's nothing missing in his game. He's a great pass protector. But some teams are going to get enamored with height, weight, speed, and he is a classic guard. He's not one of those freak athletes that can run a 4.8, I don't think. I think he's kind of in the standard, hey, a guard runs like this. So he's top 50, right? But where does he land in the NFL draft? I think he's a second-round draft pick, which is for a guard really high. But there's been some stuff out there saying he's a top 10 pick, and I don't know about that. It's not just this is the problem. It's like the problem is the overhype there, and then I feel like I'm trying to be responsible about this, and it sounds like I'm dumping on Vanga Ioane here. He's awesome. But I hope I can temper fans' expectations a little bit. I think maybe he could be a first round draft pick, but it's not a slam dunk lock that he's a first round draft pick in the draft. And that's not a bad, it's not a terrible thing that if you're not first, you're last in the NFL draft. That's not how the draft works. So I don't know. Probably a lot of, unnecessary details there, but that's how I roll.
Yeah, no worries, T. Frank. Penn State and Vanga Awani certainly hoping for the best draft outcome possible for him and for the rest of his teammates who will be leaving for the NFL at the end of this season. Most of the mock drafts right now have Vanga somewhere in the back half of the top 32 picks, which would make him a first-round selection, obviously. Yeah. But we've seen before where before the Senior Bowl and before the Combine, guys end up in certain spots and then can drop out. So
yeah. And here's the other thing is that it's based on guys who have a certain point in their eligibility. So Vanga Ioane was on everyone's radar last year. As a redshirt junior, he's a part of this class of 2022 that are seniors. So Drew Shelton was a first-round draft pick or was like a top pick before this season, right? Because of where he is in terms of power 4, top of the conference starter at left tackle. And then the evaluation happened. And the next thing is juniors that declare. guys that are going to be a part of the process and discovered over the next couple of months in the draft industrial complex. And so that's a part of this conversation as well. It's not just Wenger and his skills. It's the context of what are the other positions of strength? Is this a soft draft and there aren't a bunch of quarterbacks and edge rushers and receivers that go in the first round? And or is it more of a meat and potatoes defensive tackle offensive line draft? Like all these things are going to play into whether or not he ends there. But, if you told me he was a top 32 pick in the NFL draft from like the known quantities right now, I probably wouldn't push back as much as maybe I did earlier. I just I've seen this a lot, right? Where it's like, here's a really good player that played well for Penn State. Guard is not like a priority position. You got to be a freak to be drafted in the first round most of the time, unless one team does something weird. And we've seen the Seahawks do stuff like that. The Patriots do stuff like that. So it's not out of the world, out of the world possibility.
Right. Time will certainly tell on that. This is the December 10th edition of BWI Live. Thanks for being with us. If you are live on YouTube, good morning to everyone. Good afternoon if you're listening later in the day, either here on YouTube or via your favorite podcast channel, or even on the site, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Go ahead, T. Frank.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to start the show with, and there was a bunch of stuff going on at the beginning of the show. I just want to apologize to our podcast audience because there was something that happened in the software on that side this weekend that jammed up our audio. And so a couple of videos didn't get out till yesterday, including, the breaking news that Penn State had hired Matt Campbell, which is supposed to go out Friday evening. So I just wanted to apologize. So if you see a bunch of stuff that's like, wow, that's old, what's that doing there? That's why. I had to go in and I had to, it's the unplug it and plug it back in thing. And so I just wanted to apologize to the podcast audience and explain hey, that's what happened. So, if something works every single day until it doesn't, you don't check on it every single day to make sure it all worked every day. And I just got caught in one of those. So that's what happened.
All good, T. Frank. We will make sure it gets fixed for you on the podcast side and appreciate everyone who listens there. Don't forget, subscribe, leave a comment. We appreciate all that. A review if you're listening on the podcast side of things. Let's get into today's title topic, and that is a look at the Penn State offense in 2026 and how Matt Campbell, his new coaching staff, his current beliefs about Penn State's roster and his current knowings of the Iowa State roster could help blend the Penn State offense together in 2025. I just did Big Ten this morning on the SiriusXM Big Ten channel with a couple of the guys over there right before the show started. And they asked me, T. Frank, what priority number one was. And I said, well, you could put probably 50 things at the top of Matt Campbell's priority list right now. Yeah. But I looked, it does, and the host point at the end of this was, well, he's developed quarterbacks, he'll be fine. They'll be like, yeah, that's true, but it's quarterback. It's figuring out quarterback. Matt Campbell has said it to reporters at Beaver Stadium. He said it to Josh Pate during an interview on the Josh Pate College Football Show, and he has said it elsewhere during his time at Iowa State. If your quarterback and your head coach aren't aligned, you got a problem. So let's start there. You want to start there? Or you want to start with the offensive line? Your choice.
No, let's start with the quarterback. Yeah.
Yep.
My instinct is immediately to go away from the most important main topic and go to something niche and interesting, and that has a bigger effect maybe on the quarterback in terms of the ecosystem. But the quarterback is the answer, right? The reason quarterback is so important is because the quarterback can make up for the sins of the offensive line in a lot of situations by being elusive in the pocket, throwing with anticipation, getting rid of the football, mitigating pressure, and just fixing stuff, putting the ball on receivers, etc. So it is the Band-Aid that Penn State has wanted for years to fix some of the things with receiver or whatever. So I guess where do you want to start in that conversation of Ethan Grunkemeyer, the incumbent who started the final 6 games, and then Rocco Beck, who has been the quarterback at Iowa State for 3 years, I believe, 3 years as the starter. This would be his 4th year as the starter coming up next year, wherever he plays.
Yeah, I think it's just fascinating. Let's take the Penn State side of it first. So this is a quarterback room that looks, quite frankly, nothing like we thought it was going to at this time of the year back in August. So Drew Aller, of course, has been out for the last 6 weeks. Ethan Grunkemeyer is currently the Penn State single season accuracy leader in terms of passes completed. So with a minimum of 100 attempts. So certainly he's done a nice job protecting the ball, has gotten better each week. And so the question that Matt Campbell's going to quickly have to figure out is Ethan Grunkemeyer his guy? Because if not, and even if so, I would expect Grunkemeyer and all these guys to maybe test the portal waters. Why wouldn't you? Maybe somebody gives you a crazy offer to go somewhere else. Maybe you don't want to stay with whoever the offensive coordinator and or quarterback coach is. Or maybe you just get a better offer to come back to Penn State and say, hey, you want me? Here's what it's going to cost based on what XYZ is offering me. So I think Penn State fans need to prepare for a lot of that. Guys that go into portal and then end up coming back. Like, it just seems to me that would be the smart thing to do because the option exists. So anyway, we'll see if Grunkemeyer ends up going that route. But you have Grunkemeyer, you have an injured Jackson Smolik, and then you have Beckham Kritza. And Jack Lambert is still here as well, the walk-on quarterback from North Carolina. So they need a quarterback, T-Frank. I don't think there's any question about that. Like, you're going to need depth. At the very least, you're going to need depth. If you decide Grunkemeyer is your guy, great. If you don't, you're probably losing him. If you decide Rocco Beck's your guy and you want to go try and get him in the portal, if he goes into the portal and wants to leave Iowa State, great. He's your guy. Somebody has to back him up. So it's going to be a fascinating deal for Penn State in this offseason, man, because who wants to come to a school where he doesn't think he has a chance to be the starter?
So there's so much there, right? So let's just start with, let's narrow the focus to Ethan Grunkemeyer and Rocco Becht. And those are the two guys we're going to discuss the pros and cons, and not a wild card third option from the portal or one of these guys leaving to a different school. Let's just keep it to the either or, which is not the reality, but it is close enough to the reality, right? So I'm assuming, and I think this is fairly safe to say, that Matt Campbell is going to bring his offensive philosophies, his offensive game plan to Penn State. So if Rocco Becht follows him, I don't know how there's any way in the world Ethan Grunkemeyer is the starter in 2026 because of the baked-in advantage that Becht has of being in the offense for his entire career. So that is a real thing. When you're talking about, we've got to have production on Saturday. Like, against whomever it is, when you start the Big Ten schedule, we want to have the best quarterback who can deliver on the football field. Becht has proven he can do it in this offense, and he's been good. You know, last season, there's some ups and there's some downs. The offensive passing game was not fully fleshed out. And to be honest with you, I'm currently in the middle. I stopped doing film analysis to do this show today, so there's still much more to learn. But overall, Rocco Becht is a good quarterback, and he has how many years of 3 years of starting experience, and has been generally like a good quarterback throughout that time. I think his confidence stands out. His I'm going to call it my favorite term, athletic hubris, where he believes he can put the ball into a tight window and he's willing to throw it. He will throw go balls. He will throw back shoulders. There are things that he does that Penn State fans have been desperate for quarterbacks in this system to do, that they just haven't pulled the trigger on some of those plays. And his deep ball, I think, is a good. He's got a quality deep ball. The question then becomes, like, if you want to keep Ethan Grunkemeyer and you think the upside is high enough, and if you believe you can develop quarterbacks at a rate that Ethan Grunkemeyer can exceed what Rocco Becht can do in short order, then I think that's the only way you prioritize him. But the reality is I don't see an ability to have both these guys on the roster next year, because Grunkemeyer started 6 games last year. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore, right? And so that's right when quarterback's third year, they really want to start, and they want to have several years of production to show the NFL. So there is a problem here where I don't see how you have both guys on the roster unless you can convince Grunkemeyer, who has a prior relationship with Matt Campbell, that you'll be able to compete this year for the job, and that next year, because Becht is going to be a redshirt senior, you will have your redshirt junior year and your redshirt senior year, if you need it, to be the guy and operate the offense. And so how do you sell Ethan? To me, like, it's almost a foregone conclusion that Rocco Becht is going to come to Happy Valley and be in this offense, because he's productive. He's got all the traits you're looking for, I think, as a quarterback. There's some things missing. Like, there's some things he's not consistent with that we can get into that over on the site and in a longer forum here. But Grunkemeyer, for what he showed last year, didn't show the full set of skills to read a defense, from first to third progression, understand how to go through those consistently. He was a little bit one read and run. And then what he did deliver was a highly tailored offense to get him open throws in play action situations or with screens and RPOs that were not down the field. So that is not a full playbook. That is not what they were doing at Iowa State, and it didn't show a comprehensive quarterback. Now, can he be that in the future? That is the entire part of this conversation. Penn State fans are going to get behind their guy, but pretty soon Rocco Becht could probably be your guy, and you'll get behind him. And so I have a hard time seeing the path for Ethan Grunkmeyer to be the starter if Becht makes the decision to come here, and then for him to stay on the roster. Like, it would be a very impressive job by Matt Campbell and whoever his OC and quarterback coach are to convince Grunkmeyer, a guy who is poised to go into the starting lineup somewhere, as you mentioned, and have him compete, but really like be the backup quarterback here. So I think it's a fantasy that he could be here as the backup and would be fine with that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. You're muted, Greg.
Sorry about that. I think that's a good way of transitioning to the next part of our conversation about the Iowa State, Penn State offense portal blending situation with Matt Campbell now in charge in State College. The running backs, Penn State will be without Katron out and Nick Singleton after this season. Obviously, a lot of fans are wondering if those two guys will be joining Zane Durant in opting out of the Pinstripe Bowl. Personally, I'd be shocked if they did not end up doing that, but they have not announced anything yet. Terry Smith's pretty adamant on Tuesday that Zane Durant right now was the only opt-out. I feel bad for fans. I just want to take a moment and feel bad for fans. Like, I understand if these guys can announce their decision to play or not play any way they want. But everyone remembers the Peach Bowl and what happened there in terms of guys didn't officially opt out, but a whole heck of a lot of them either played only a little bit or didn't play at all.
Like the first half.
And a lot of people paid a lot of money to go to Atlanta for that game. So I feel bad for fans who are thinking to themselves, well, if these guys are going to play, this could be a nice day trip to New York, but it's going to be this, that expensive. So hopefully we get some more answers for you too. Yeah, cold for sure. But anyway, moving on to the running back conversation. So those two are out at the moment. You have Corey Smith on the roster. You have Quentin Martin Jr. on the roster. And you have Jabri Coleman and Tyke Hayes as well. So this is a young group.
Cam Wallace.
T. Frank. And Cam Wallace too, obviously, yes. So Cam Wallace, I'm trying to figure out what the situation is there because he did not travel to Rutgers. He was not on the availability report, but he is still on the roster. So TBD there, obviously a guy who has fought through some injuries. As of all these guys to some extent during their time at Penn State. So where are you at on the running back situation, T. Frank, at this early juncture?
This one is really hard for me because, again, the idea of bringing... So let's start with you want to bring some players from Iowa State to accelerate the transition into this new offense. You want guys on the field and guys in position drills. You would like to have one at each position to help teach the other players on the roster the offense. But if you bring too many, you risk pushing guys out the door. Penn State has had a bottleneck at running back for 2 years now with those two guys that were juniors that stayed for their senior year and a lot of young talent at the back end of the roster here who got to see zero playing time in 2025. And I think that did breed some frustration. And there was this season-long confusion about who was running back 3. Are they available? Will we ever see them?
It was very clear it was no one. It was you or me.
Right. And so, like, I've gotten the sense, and here was the weird one. The final home game, was it Nebraska, right? The final home game was Nebraska?
That's correct,
where
yes.
I saw all of the running backs on Wednesday of, like, practicing, right? And then all of them are on the availability report as out on Saturday. And again, there are things that can happen between then and now, that day, Wednesday and Saturday, where guys get banged up. But all of them at the same position, all of them got banged up and were unavailable. Like, that just to me was like the final straw this is a really weird situation. And like they were visible or not visible during practice, and that's just our only clue in. So, it was kind of trying to understand and negotiate what's going on at that position, because all those players matter for the future of the program, whether they're going to stick around or not, whether they're developing or not, and how we can kind of glean into that, which, again, is a fool's errand, but it is what at least I try to do on a week-to-week basis, because there are some things you can learn. So, huge preamble to the idea. I think you can only bring one of the Iowa State running backs over without chasing out all those young guys. Because what you're doing then is you're taking two seniors and replacing them with two seniors and cutting off the path to the field for these young guys. And I do think Abu Sama he's the more athletic of the two, more explosive player. I think he has the Big Ten ability to break tackles and translate to this level. Now, Carson Hansen had more snaps last year. He's a good receiver. He's an athletic, fluid player, but he doesn't break a lot of tackles. For his size, 6'2", 220, he's got a tall frame, and I don't know that he lowers his shoulder through contact the way you would want for a power back or a guy just generally to break tackles. So you risk taking a good player that I question, like, generally his translation to the Big Ten from that particular aspect of breaking tackles and generating yards above what the scheme gives you, because the scheme will give you less against better defenses.
Right.
And so, like, to me, the equation is that versus the upside of a guy like Tyke Hayes, Jabri Wallace-Coleman, Corey Smith, and Quentin Martin. So those four players, some of them are leaving. There's nothing you're going to do about that. They've had enough. Maybe some of them are going to Virginia Tech. Maybe some of them are going elsewhere. But if you can keep some of those young guys, and I could identify a couple here, but it's not necessary. Some of those guys have to be part of the future, or else you are hitting a very hard reset on the running back position, and then you have to go into the portal or into recruiting, and you're in a position where, again, you only have two starters, and you don't have any of that, like, available talented depth. And so this is a hard one, where the easy thing to say is bring everybody, make everybody stay, pay everyone, and then, figure it out later. That's not going to work. I don't think that's how Matt Campbell works. I don't think that's how they want to spend their money. And so this is a really hard decision. But for me, the way I've worked it out, and I talked about this in an article this week, is I think Abu Sama is the guy I would target and then try to figure out which one of the young guys on the depth chart wants to stay and you think has the talent to elevate the position in the future.
Right. There's no doubt about that. It'll be interesting to see as we get into closer to portal season how many of these Iowa State guys start going into the portal. Keep in mind they opted out of a bowl game, so there's no postseason on the horizon for the Cyclones. Still, the portal does not open until January 2nd, so plenty of time for those decisions to be made. Let's move on to receiver. Penn State obviously will have another reset at that position group as we sit here and talk at 10:40 a.m. on December 10th. No decision yet on whether Marcus Hagans will be back with this Penn State program in 2026. I think we'd both be surprised if that was the case, T. Frank.
Shocked.
But what is your read on the receiver position moving into 2026?
Not good. I don't have a good read on it because, first off, Penn State's receiver room is going to get a hard reset from the fact that those three transfers are all seniors and they're gone. The inconsistency of Iowa State's passing attack last year had some high highs and some low lows, and it netted out to decent, right? And that includes Rocco Becht in the evaluation of him, where he missed some wide open throws, but he throws some absolute dimes down the field and is, all the things we talked about. Chase Sowell, I think is how you say his name. I apologize. Chase Sowell. They brought in from Eastern Kentucky last year. 6'3", 215, and had a terrible start to the year. And this is very much, what game did you watch? What part of the year did you watch? Because early in the year, the passing game didn't look great, and they were not getting separation. And in my initial analysis, is like, okay, this looks exactly like the picture Drew Aller had to start the year. Playing in Ireland in the rain was not good for this offense. Fast forward to playing some of those Big 12 defenses. They look great against Kansas. Kansas had a bottom 3 passer rating allowed last year in the Big 12. So what do you believe in when you look at these things? But Chase Sowell has the size and the athleticism, but the production did not match that. From there, you have the Penn State youth, right? How many of those guys from Virginia are going to see James Franklin in the portal or just leaving? And how many do you think you need to retain? Obviously, Kobe Howard is the name. Tyser Denmark is the name part 2. But there are young guys on the roster that are also talented. And so I don't know that there's a good answer here. I would be very concerned for Penn State's passing game production if you just brought the receivers from Iowa State to Penn State and they play in the Big Ten. I think you would have a similar problem you had at Penn State this year. So there has to be a blend. And this is the first time where I'm saying you need to go to the portal maybe and find some answers, because I do think there's some production at Iowa State you want to bring over. But if you just say bring them all, that's a bad plan. That's not a good plan in my opinion.
Right. I completely agree. And I think that is going to be how everything over the next month of the first month rather of the Matt Campbell era will be judged. T. Frank is whatever he brings with him on-field staff, off-field staff, players, recruits from Iowa State. It's going to be judged in the lens of, is this a Penn State quality move, fairly or not? I think that is how a lot of his initial month will be evaluated. And obviously then when he goes to hire outside of that group of people, whether it's retaining Penn State people or bringing Iowa State people with, same barometer. So there's a blessing and a curse to what Iowa State and Matt Campbell has had to do at Iowa State for the last decade. And he mentioned it in his opening news conference. They had to create a collective, and they've mentioned the fact that they did not have the resources Penn State now has. Well, the resources Penn State now has also demands that you match those, essentially, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and that you hire people that are, equal to what those resources can pay and things like that. So time will tell. I don't know if you have a chat comment you want to get to here, or
it's a total derail. It's a total derailment, but it is just funny, and I'm gonna call it out. Leonard Brady here. I'm totally missing the context of the conversation. I'm just airdropping into the middle of this after doing the show, and Leonard Brady out here in the chat saying, "I'm barely a millionaire, worth just over $1 million, which is nothing." And I understand what he's saying, and I understand net worth versus, straight cash, homie. But it is the most hilarious humble brag in the chat. And I was just like, all right, Leonard Brady. All right, buddy. We get it. We see it. Okay.
Yeah, it's an in-depth opt-out conversation. And should guys opt out and should they not? And who paid them to have NIL and things like that. So anyway, tight ends and offensive line, I'll put them together, T. Frank.
Yeah.
Obviously.
No, I want to do O-line separate. I want to do O-line because I think that's the biggest conversation here is the O-line.
Well, let's just buzz through the tight ends quick, because I think that the problem here to have this conversation is the same one people are having a problem with in the chat, is that you don't know who's going to follow Ty Howard at Virginia Tech. I personally don't know the first thing about Virginia Tech's tight end situation. So you don't know who's going there. Obviously, guys could go anywhere they want to go. Guys could want to stay at Penn State, and I know that there's a name here you list for, or two you actually mentioned from Iowa State, but I would assume whatever those guys decide to do, if they want to come to Penn State, probably going to be at least in the interim, maybe a little bit dependent on what some of these Penn State returners do at that spot.
This, to me, comes down to how do you build out your tight end room, because there's two separate positions. There's a lot of overlap, but if you're saying, we need an inline Y tight end, the guy that lines up next to the tackle and blocks, and then your H-back, your sometimes you call it the F, whatever you want to call that. To me, the answer is Andrew Rappleyea, and then figure it out after that. Now, the guys that I've targeted on the roster from Iowa State are in the idea that you are going to bring some of these guys over, and Penn State is going to lose because Ty Howell going to be the play caller. I mean, there's a very clear a lot of these guys are leaving. A lot of these young guys, there's a strong chance they're going to leave. So how do you build a good starting unit? And to me, it's about fit between the two positions. So Andrew Rappleyea, to me, is your H-back tight end. And then Gabe Burkle was the inline Y, who did a decent job at Iowa State last year. So those would be the two that I'm building my room around. And then it becomes Luke Reynolds. Does he stay? And then are there young guys over on the roster for Iowa State? Cooper Alexander, he's going to be a junior this year. He played a little bit last year. He's more of a move tight end. That's the decision of what's the depth look like. So, but to me, Andrew Rappleyea, he has to stay for Penn State this year because of the way he finished the season, his talent, etc. these two offenses are very similar in how they were built and constructed. Tight ends are important. Andrew Rappelier is the best of the group overall, full stop. And then to me, it's how do you build around that?
Well, speaking of building, Penn State's going to have to build an offensive line that it can compete in the Big Ten with. If you can't block, you can't run, and you're not going to be able to throw. Yep. And then no matter who your quarterback is, no matter what your offense is and who's calling the plays, things almost always aren't going to work out if you don't have the guys in place in the trenches. So, T. Frank, I'll let you run away and take this one on, and I will be happy to interject any thoughts, but this is one you've dug in on a bit, so I'm going to let you run with it.
So this is the biggest problem. Watching Penn State's offense, obviously Penn State has a lot of seniors that are leaving, and so there's not a lot of retention there from the starting unit. And then Iowa State, their best players were seniors, and then everyone else I don't believe is Big Ten quality. That I would not be comfortable saying these players can definitely play at this level and would be of Penn State's caliber over the last couple of years. So it becomes Penn State's depth. And this is where I'm ignorant of Iowa State's young players because they did not play a ton of them. And so I don't know like what they have in the chamber, right, to bring over as these talented players. So I'm going to lean on, here's Penn State's depth, pick your favorites. And it doesn't have to be in this order. This is just the names on the roster. Anthony Donko is the guy at the top of the list, obviously there. Then it becomes the conversation about which of these players makes sense to stay at Penn State. Which one of these guys do you think can play next year and can take that step into a starting lineup and you can convince to stay? So, which one of these, and to me, I would prefer, if I'm a coach, to take the guys that can play tackle and have those tackle measurements because Iowa State does they like their prototype tackles as well. Their tackle last year, I think, was at minimum 6'6". And so you've got to figure out which one of these offensive linemen. Owen Alcini is a great up-and-coming young player. Egan Boyer was a favorite of the staff previously. I think Garrett Sexton played very well last year. He's coming and rounding into form as a guy that had some ups and downs early in his developmental career. So those are three tackles, right? This is what Phil Trautwein had built at Penn State, and it does not look likely that he's going to stay. So wherever he goes, how many of these guys want to go there? And again, is it Virginia Tech? Is it the transfer portal? There's a lot of talent here that's going to command dollars because of their size, their recruiting profile, and they don't have bad film. So everyone can see the shiny object, not just fans. And then, of course, I know I haven't said the magic words, Cooper Cousins, TJ Shanahan, Javen Williams, Malachi Goodman, a 5-star. I don't think they're going to keep all of them. And I don't know which one of these guys you're going to be able to keep, but you have to keep some of these players because this is the talent that if you can develop those young players to be starters this year, I think that you're going to have to do your best to make sure Anthony Donko stays for certain. And then from there, pick the guys that you think have the best chance to play next year and that you're going to invest in. The last thing I'll say about any of this, whether it's quarterback, tight end, whatever, I do think that Pat Kraft has painted himself into a bit of a corner because he's talked many times about how the elite resources at Penn State are what they are, right? And the money and the numbers and that leaked conversation that he had about paying players on the roster and everyone getting paid the same and all the things that all kind of go into this. I know that this is not a surprise because this is something Nate's been saying here on the show. The number to keep these guys is going up. Like the number for the offensive line and the players you want to retain, it is going up, and it has to be a more serious conversation in line with what was going on before, where a lot of these guys, everyone was getting paid, but everyone's getting paid at a discount. So choices most likely have to be made, and I know they're going to lead with relationships, etc.
Yeah.
But finances are a part of it now because Pat Kraft has firmly inserted that conversation into the narrative, and we've seen how the players have responded. So I think it's really important. To me, like quarterback and then offensive line. You're not bringing guys over from Iowa State. And so if I'm investing, it's offensive line. I want to retain some of those players because they are supremely talented. And just because Penn State fans haven't seen them yet doesn't mean that they aren't, on the cusp of being ready. And Iowa State's offensive line coaching has been good. So there is a path forward for, hey, this is what we did with guys in the past. You're more talented. Let's take you and make you that.
You're 100% correct, T. Frank. And so, it's going to be, I think if you take nothing else away from this conversation this morning or this afternoon if you're listening, it's that Penn State and Matt Campbell are going to very quickly need to figure out how they are going to allocate their resources. And again, this is not, I don't want to call it a concern, but it is a reality that Matt Campbell and the people he have brought with him from Iowa State have never dealt with this at this level. I mean, they have certainly dealt with keeping guys, but I think without going back and looking in depth, I would have to assume that more often than not, if somebody wanted to outbid Iowa State for a portal guy to leave the Cyclones to go somewhere else, they probably just got outbid. Now they're going to have to make decisions about who they want to go all out for and outbid, and they'll have the backing to do it. And those decisions will define how things go. So I think that's a fascinating story to follow. And it will obviously help with some of the conversations we've had here, either keeping guys from Penn State at Penn State or bringing in guys from elsewhere. So final thoughts on that, T. Frank, before best bets?
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. A lot of these names that everyone wants to pay everybody, and everyone, the chat is got some ideas that I don't think are feasible. It's going to be rough. And the wild card is the portal. Like, how much do they want to use the portal? How much do they have to use the portal to supplement this roster to find starters? Because I could even make the argument that you don't have enough guys proven on the Penn State roster to play next year. Like, you want to have some proven offensive linemen, whether it's at Penn State, Iowa State, or otherwise. I don't see, like, this is the problem. I don't see it. I don't see any guys because they were all seniors on both offensive lines. So it's got to come from somewhere. And I will say, like, baked into this is my ignorance of other options in the portal and some of the guys at Iowa State they feel can come over here and play in the Big Ten level. But that's going to be what determines the success of the offense next year, is how they figure out what is a clear lack of cohesion between the two rosters to bring something together.
All right, let's get into best bets here on the final home stretch of this Wednesday edition of BWI Live. All right, best bets presented by BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3 and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code ON3, that's O-N and the number 3, when you sign up. Make this college football season one for the history books. Make it legendary with BetMGM. Bowl season is here, T. Frank, but not before one final regular season game that will take place before the first bowl game of the year. So my first best bet of the week of December 9th focuses on Army-Navy. This is obviously the annual game that is played on this Saturday every year as we continue to talk about college football playoff expansion and changes to the calendar. I don't know how many more years you're going to see this game played on this Saturday. Like the first round, in theory, in an expanded playoff would have to start this weekend. You can't have a regular season game playing the same day as playoff games, obviously. So I'm not sure how many more of these we're going to get on this particular Saturday. So there's something to keep in mind. So Army-Navy, though, the total currently at BetMGM is 38.5. I like the over in this game, T. Frank. This is a higher total than we typically see for this game, and I realize everyone loves to usually race to bet the under in this contest because of the way both teams have a history of running the ball and killing the clock. But I like the over here. Both teams have, I saw it written, I believe, on Sportsline that both teams have not, fully joined the 21st century, but have at least booked their airline tickets to get out of the 20th century by passing a little bit more. And I think that'll lead to some points in this game. And I think both teams get into the 20s, which would put us comfortably over 38.5.
I know nothing about service academies at all, like from their offensive and defensive perspective. Greg, he's got it on lockdown. I have nothing to add.
Second one stays on this Saturday. Washington, Boise State meet in the LA Bowl at SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California to kick off.
Wait, bowl games are already starting?
Season. Oh, yes. The first bowl game and the final regular season game are on the same day. Yeah, so I'm going to take Washington minus 8.5 here against Boise State. The Broncos, to me, it felt like very similar to Penn State. I think the record might have been a little bit better in the Mountain West, but very similar to Penn State. Like, they obviously made it as far as they could have hoped for last year. And then you come into this season hoping to match that, and now you're playing in the LA Bowl. Like, I just don't envision Boise State being all that interested in this game. I don't know how much Washington's going to be interested, but my initial surface read on this is that Boise State probably has very little interest in this contest. So I'm laying them with Washington State with Washington rather, minus 8.5 at BetMGM. So that's best bet number 2. And then best bet number 3, we're going to focus on an early Pinstripe Bowl pick. Penn State Clemson. A meet on December 27th at Yankee Stadium in New York. Currently, the total for that game is 48.5 points, and before the opt-out start, I'm going to lock in this over. I think this number is already reflecting the fact of who the odds makers think could opt out of this game, both for Penn State and for Clemson. So, if there's a run of opt-outs, I would be surprised if this total moves a ton. I think the only one that could really change things is if Clemson quarterback Cade Klubnik, who has said he is going to play in this game, opts out of it. But with what he has said and what we expect from Penn State, I like the over here. I think we're going to see some points. Penn State gave up yards in large clips to Rutgers. Obviously, some of the best guys, or supposedly best guys, and most talent on this Penn State defense are not going to play against Clemson. So I'm going with the over 48.5, T. Frank. And to set up our final segment of the show, this line's moved. It was 1.5 on Sunday in favor of Penn State. It is now plus 3.5. Penn State is plus 3.5. Clemson favored by over a field goal.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting stuff there, but that's where I'm going, at least for now, with the total, and we'll see how things play out.
That's a great question. Like, I have a hard time with Penn State in this position. Here's my question. Is Penn State using the bowl time to practice and reconfigure the defensive line further? Like, to really work out the kinks of what they can be with Jim Knowles? And, like, do they come out with a different plan up front to stop the run and, put them in a better position of RPO defense? I don't know what they're doing in the bowl practice. I don't know what the focus of the team is going to be in this situation. So, yeah, I guess points are important, but I don't know with Ethan Grunkmeyer, and then if you have a bunch of opt-outs on the offensive line, if that you're going to get points from Penn State. So it's got to be Clemson heavy in that for me.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. That's best bets for December 10th from BetMGM.
See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer now for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are not withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossings Casino and Hotel.
All right. Final segment of the show here. We are going to talk a little Pinstripe Bowl. Not a lot, because obviously each day it feels like we learn a little bit more about what Penn State's plan will be for this contest in the Pinstripe Bowl. Terry Smith talking yesterday. Wanted to hit quickly on 2 things he brought up. I did mention earlier that he said Zane Durant is currently the only opt-out. Somebody asked in the chat earlier in the show if bowl practices had started yet. They have. And I'm assuming if they go on their typical schedule, I'm assuming they continue this afternoon, Wednesday, December 10th, to be my guess. And then probably again this weekend. So we'll see if anybody else joins the fray here. Obviously, I think some of these guys might be tempted to at least play a little bit for Terry Smith or for their current position coach, who is still around but may not be next season, or who may be parting ways with either them or the program. So maybe there won't be as many opt-outs, at least officially, as we expect, but guys who have reduced snap counts. I don't know, T. Frank, but that's where Terry Smith is at on that conversation. And then he was asked yesterday why he wanted to stay, and basically said, I can only work for so many people at this stage of my career. Matt Campbell's one of them. It sounds like they've taken care of him financially, Terry Smith, that is. So certainly it feels like they made it almost impossible for him to say no, despite the fact that they said no to him getting the full-time job.
Yeah, and I'm still shocked by it, like with how that played out and how adamant he was and the lengths that he went to try and make himself a candidate for the job, for him to, like, he's just, I have a lot of respect for him through all of that, and to like just really love the Penn State University the way he does, and to be committed to something bigger than himself like that, I think is admirable. And you know, I struggle with it feels like a very egoless move to stay. And also on the other side, like I'm sure financially it was, as you said, make it hard to stay. The last thing, and this will be my last thought on the show today. This isn't personal finance, right? So the money that an organization spends to make money, like Penn State is a business and it can spend money to make money at a higher rate and debt and servicing debt and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like all those things we don't need to get into. Like we don't need to get into those. But I just have this experience in my life of watching somebody, like a cousin of mine, try to run a business kind of like this. Of Pat Kraft likes to spend money, and like money will not be the object in the way of success. But there is this thing that happens when you do that you ignore value where you can find it. And so like the money they're committing to the roster, the aggression with NIL, I think all that's great. Keeping Terry Smith, paying him probably a lot of money. I think, what was it, the highest paid non-coordinator in college football? At a certain point, you are overspending to fix problems. And at a certain point, money doesn't fix problems. Finding value also fixes those problems. And I'm curious as to how Matt Campbell and Pat Kraft can bridge that, because I don't think Matt Campbell is a spend to fix problems guy. And so there's going to have to be something in between, because I know the model that Pat Kraft outlined and what he wanted to be. I don't know that's the best one in college football, right? And so a little uncomfortable at times with kind of like, they're going to make this the most expensive thing and this the most expensive thing. It's like, you can't just solve every problem with money. Sometimes the value is getting a guy for a value that is fair for both sides and not just throwing money at everything. And like, I know I'm kind of going in a circle here, but it is just like, it is a very delicate thing of being aggressive all the time versus selective aggression when you need it.
Yes, that's 100% correct. And I think that is, again, kind of a good way to end the show, T. Frank, because it really hits on something we've talked about really this entire show. But the decisions coming up next for Matt Campbell, for Pat Kraft, obviously when it comes to staff building and when it comes to player roster retention and acquisition decisions, is that you're going to have to make the choices over balancing spending here versus cutting back there versus wanting to bring this guy in versus preferring to keep that guy. And it all costs money. And you have to save it where you can, and you also have to spend it where you can if you hope to be the best version of yourself in 2026, which, of course, is what Penn State is hoping for. So, that's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. This has been another edition of BWI Live. The guys are back tomorrow with the recruiting show on Thursday, December 11th. Tune in at 10 a.m. or check it out wherever you get your audio, whether it's on replay here on YouTube or the podcast side of things. T. Frank and I will be back next week or maybe sooner. Who knows? If things happen, we'll be here. You know that. And we'll be at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com too. So have a great rest of the Wednesday, everyone. Talk to you next time.